What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Happy Monday to you. This is Called to Communion, the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith. Maybe you're looking around for some way to get those answers that you've been looking for. What a great place. We can do that for you. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates for some folks may apply. Again, that phone number, 833-288-EWTN. Michael Birchfield is our producer. He is the one manipulating the dials and knobs and hopefully not setting anything on fire. Matt Kabinski will be taking your phone calls. He's our phone screener. And Jeff Burson is on the JOB to tackle those social media questions that you can pose on Facebook or YouTube. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you?
Groovy. How was your weekend?
My weekend was busy. It was good, though. And I took my 9-year-old for a lengthy bike ride yesterday
That's
morning.
fun.
Beautiful blue sky,
Yeah.
sun and wind, and it was a little bit chilly, but it was very nice.
Cool. That's wonderful. Here's a text that we received. This is very interesting, kind of timely, too. This is from Steve. When did Easter and the Triduum first be celebrated? Was it the first anniversary of Jesus' death, or was it some other time?
Okay, thanks. So we have a good bit of documentation about the celebration of Easter, even in the 2nd century. And the fathers of the 2nd century speak of it as an apostolic tradition. All right. And in fact, there was a controversy in the 2nd century over the dating of Easter, and there was a difference between the East and the West. And the Eastern bishops regarded their practices of apostolic origin, which was one of the reasons they were loath to give it up. All right. That's about as good as I can do. When it comes to the whole liturgy surrounding the Triduum, that's going to be a later development, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when sort of the whole collection of the cycle of the liturgical services around Triduum were fully established as a defined part of the liturgy. But the celebration of the Lord's resurrection on the Feast of Easter is very, very early in the Church's tradition. I'm only aware of documents from the 2nd century, but those documents themselves reference an oral tradition that is claimed to have gone back to the apostles.
Oh, wow. Okay. Steve, thank you so much for your text. Here's another one. This is an email that we got from Kirk, and I thought this was fascinating. Greetings from South Texas. Dr. Anders, you have spoken in the past about binding and loosing as related to the apostles and their successors. Kirk wants to know, can I bind and loose? To what extent and when? Thanks for your words of wisdom and insight, Kirk.
Thanks, Kirk. You can only bind and loose, Kirk, those things over which you have a lawful jurisdiction.
Okay.
Okay, so let me give you an example. I don't know if you're married. I don't know if you have children. If you're married and have children and you have a family, then you have a lawful parental authority over your own home. All right? And fathers bind and loose all the time.
Sure
all
do.
Right? Sorry, you don't get the car keys. You're not going out Friday night because you came home late Wednesday after the soccer game.
Okay.
Bound. All right?
Yep.
Sunday. Timeout is over. I'll give you the car keys back. Loosed.
Got
okay?
it.
You bind and loose all day long.
Okay.
All right? But you don't have juridical authority over the sacraments of the Catholic Church. Right? That's given to the bishops, the successors of the apostles, and is administered generally through the priests that are collaborators of the bishop in the governance and management of the diocesan church. Now, a bishop or a priest could delegate a specific area of apostolate to you. I work for my bishop. I'm a layman. I'm not a priest. I'm not a ministerial priest, and I work for the Diocese of Birmingham. And, my jurisdiction extends, let's see, I think my office is probably about 10 feet wide. It extends about 10 feet plus to the adjoining offices of about three or four office rooms in the second floor of the Chancery of Birmingham. Outside of that, I'm frequently reminded by the Presbyterian here in Birmingham that my jurisdiction stops at the walls of the Chancery.
Okay.
Right? And doesn't even extend upwards to the third floor. It's just a small little corner of the second floor.
Doesn't even make the elevator.
Doesn't even make the elevator.
Oh,
exactly.
That's a shame.
That's about all the room I have to bind and loose.
Okay.
And a lot of times it's by persuasion and a well-placed begging here or there.
And a little smile every now and then.
A smile gets a long way. Yeah,
Sounds good. When we come back, we'll be talking with Stan in Biloxi. We have a couple of lines open for you at the moment. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, what a great time to get that question to us. 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on Monday on EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
How about this? Apple TV allows you to instantly stream EWTN to your TV. Get EWTN today. It's easy. All you need is a high-speed internet connection, a TV, and the Apple TV player.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The third commandment, remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. Of all the commandments, it might seem that we would get this one right. After all, it commands us to rest one day. But so often we're off to our own pursuits. God asks us to take one day to stop, reflect, rejoice, spend time with Him and with our family. But so often we're running everywhere else. It's also a day for worship. The book of Leviticus says, 6 days work shall be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest and a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is the Sabbath of the Lord. And the book of Hebrews says that we should not neglect to meet together, as is a habit of some. And so again, we're asked by God to spend time reflecting and worshiping, and likewise spend time with our family. The third commandment, remember to keep holy the Sabbath day.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Bishop Robert Barron.
Just as Fulton Sheen used radio and TV in the last century, we need to continue to use Catholic radio to announce the Catholic faith in the public forum.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Here's a reminder that tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show, Matt and Annie will be talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson all about the Pope's release of his new Apostolic Exhortation on Holiness. So you'll want to find out about that at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning Eastern Time here on EWTN. Have you had a chance to take a look at that document yet?
I have downloaded it and printed a paper copy, or a friend of mine printed me a paper copy, and I have it on my desk at the office waiting to be read. But
my understanding,
it just came out this morning.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's kind of on the long side.
Not what I had. I mean,
really?
Well, no, I mean, we've had papal document inflation in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
If you go back and look at Humana Vitae issued in 1968, I mean, the thing's like 2 or 3 pages long. It's like, hey, short, sweet, read it, get the message, you're good to go. Next, okay.
Yeah.
And then John Paul II started the old papal encyclical inflation routine, and he started putting out these little booklets essentially, and they got longer and longer and longer. And then when Pope Benedict wrote some pretty long encyclicals, and then Pope Francis is like, I got him beat. So his apostolic exhortation is a couple hundred pages long.
Wow.
This one, by modern papal standards, is relatively brief.
Okay. All right. Very good. Anyway, do check it out tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Eastern Time, the Sunrise Morning Show with Annie and Matt. A great, great program. If you're ready now, let's get to the phones here at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Stan in Biloxi, Mississippi, listening on the Almighty's 690. Hello, Stan. What's on your mind today?
Why is the Catholic Church opposed to the practice of yoga, and why?
Okay, thanks, Dan. The question, as stated, I find ambiguous. It's not sufficiently specific for me to answer yes or no. Yoga is a many thousands-year-old spiritual practice that comes to us from one of the schools of Orthodox Hinduism, and we find its earliest articulation in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. All right, and if you read Patanjali and you read the Yoga Sutras, you find yoga presented as a path of liberation leading to moksha or salvation through discriminative knowledge and the acquisition of samadhi, which is a meditative state. And in Patanjali's mind, it arises when a person comes to an understanding of the dualistic nature of reality, distinguishing mind and self and consciousness from body, and suffering and ignorance arises when one of those dualistic elements comes to dominate the other. So it's a form of, in Patanjali's formulation, the yogic philosophy is a form of metaphysical dualism that proposes a path of salvation through personal enlightenment and knowledge rather than ethical development or grace. Dualism and Gnostic enlightenment are not the way the Catholic Church conceptualizes our relationship to God or the path of salvation. The Catholic Church teaches that reality is not fundamentally dualistic, but that God is the ultimate reality, and that creatures created by God, are created as rational individuals, human beings are, called into a loving relationship with God through His Son Jesus Christ, and the path of salvation is by faith through grace that affects charity in our lives, not through discriminative knowledge or the practice of yogic discipline. Now, that being said, the Catholic Church takes, I think, a reasonably broad-minded approach towards non-Christian religions and believes that God, in His infinite wisdom and grace, if He wants to extend grace to people outside the formal boundaries of the Catholic Church that seek to know Him, He's certainly capable of doing that. So we're not in a position of saying that just because somebody's not Catholic, they're not necessarily going to go to heaven. But if they're going to go to heaven, it's not going to be because they've practiced yoga and acquired this dualistic view of reality. It's going to be because essentially they've reached out to God in faith and charity, and they've formed a relationship with Him somehow or another that's been transformative through grace and charity infused in their hearts. Right, that's how they're going to get to heaven, whether or not they are explicitly aware of that or not. Now, that ancient Hindu philosophy of yoga, as articulated in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, is very, very different from what I see practiced at, say, 4:30 in the afternoon at the Birmingham YMCA, when I'm on my way home from work. There I usually see some sort of middle-aged, middle-class people wearing tight Lycra clothing, bending up and bending down and bending right and bending left and going stretch, stretch, stretch for exercise. And even though many of the poses that they're practicing in that afternoon YMCA yoga class may have their origins in Patanjali's system of spiritual liberation, clearly they've been abstracted from that religious context. And I personally, the Catholic Church as such does not have a position, yay or nay, on whether or not you can practice the downward dog pose, on a Monday afternoon. And there may be more than one opinion on that question. My own personal opinion would be, stretching to the ceiling and right and left to relieve gastric distress is very different from stretching to the ceiling and right and left in order to achieve moksha through Patanjali's philosophy.
Wow. My head is about to explode. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. Stan, we hope that's helpful for you as well. When we come back, let's stay with it right here. We'll go to our next caller. This is Anthony in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, listening to us on YouTube. Hey there, Anthony. What's on your mind today?
Hi there, Dr. Anders. Hi. My question is in regards to the holy sacrifice of the Mass, where they say that the Catholic Church teaches that in the Mass, Christ is re-sacrificed or represented in the Mass. Why is he represented to us when he died on the cross 2,000 years ago for us? Or why is it called a sacrifice in the first place? Thank you.
Great. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. There are a couple of distinctions I want to draw. All right. So first of all, it is true, it's the dogmatic teaching of the Catholic Church that the Mass is a sacrifice. It is a distinct sacrifice. It is the same sacrifice of Calvary as the sacrifice of Calvary in three respects. In three respects. Jesus, who died in a bloody manner by being nailed to a cross on Calvary, in the supreme sacrifice that made sufficient reparation to God for the sins of all the world, dies only once. He is not sacrificed more than once in a bloody manner or in this supreme and all-sufficient manner. He's only sacrificed once, and that's on Calvary. However, Christ, who was the priest who made the offering on Calvary, all right,
yeah,
the victim, okay, who was offered on Calvary and who did so for the salvation of the world, is also the very same victim who's present in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, all right, because it's Christ who becomes present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the consecrated elements. The very same victim is present, although now in an unbloody way, because it's the resurrected Christ who's present on the altar, not the bleeding, dying Christ of Calvary, but Christ as he is now seated at the right hand of the Father, who comes and is present for us on the altar. So in an unbloody manner, Christ is present in the elements. The same priest, namely Christ, is effecting the sacrifice. It is in the mind of Christ to offer his body, blood, soul, and divinity to the Father in reparation for the sins of the world. So same victim, same priest, and for the same reason, namely to make reparation for sin and to reconcile humanity to God. So in those three respects, the priest is the same, the victim is the same, and the purpose is the same, or the intent is the same. We can speak of the Mass and Calvary being specifically the same sacrifice, but they're not numerically identical, all right, because each individual Mass has a propitiatory value. Okay, now, the death of Christ occurred only once. However, the death is represented to us in the Mass through the separate consecration of bread and wine. Like the reason that Mass is celebrated in two kinds, bread over here, wine over there, is because that is a perfect representation of the separation of Christ's body from his blood, all right, namely his death. And that's why we call the Mass the memorial of the death and resurrection of Jesus, because it's figured for us or represented to us Christ in a state of victimhood. Now, so the question is, why? Why is this thing necessary? Why is it salutary? Why is it useful? All right. Well, a number of reasons. It's an interesting thing that Jesus represents to us in a sacrament just about everything he wants for us to do. Okay? Christ wants us to die to ourselves and be reborn in him. So he represents that to us in the sacrament of baptism. He also makes it happen in baptism, but he represents it to us in the sacrament of baptism. Christ wants us to be people who seek forgiveness and who extend forgiveness. So he represents that to us in the sacrament of reconciliation or penance. Christ wants us to be people who will give ourselves to one another in marriage in a relationship of lifelong indissoluble fidelity where we lay down our lives for one another. So he represents that to us, that reality to us, in the sacrament of holy matrimony. Christ wants us to be people of service who bear witness to the teaching of the church, go forth into the world, make a difference for the kingdom of God, and who serve the body of Christ. And he represents that to us in the sacrament of ordination, also in confirmation. But the supreme act of worship is sacrifice, all right? And St. Paul, in fact, in the book of Romans, says that we are to offer our bodies as living sacrifices, that this is our spiritual act of worship. That's what he says in Romans. This is what true the worship of Christians looks like. It's the giving of oneself in sacrifice. So since that is sort of the pinnacle, the heart of the true life of worship, namely to offer sacrifice, well, it stands to reason that Jesus would represent that also to us in a sacrament. And so he gives us a sacrament of his own sacrificial death, represented to us in the separate consecration of the elements, bread over here, wine over there, Jesus presented before us in his state of victimhood. So as if he could say to us, see, as I have done, now go do likewise. All right? Okay. Now, but that's not all. It's not just a representation to us that we might imitate him, although clearly it is not less than that. It's at least that. But it also enables us to offer something to God of infinite value. See, my puny little life is vitiated by sin and concupiscence and pride and has very little value in itself. All right, but joined to the sacrifice of Christ, my puny little half-hearted sacrifice has suddenly become much more interesting, much more valuable to God. And I can say with St. Faustina and her famous prayer, Eternal Father, I offer you, not me, not just me, but the body, blood, soul, and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. It's a gift that he's given to us, not a burden he's imposed upon us. that we might offer to God something of supreme value and ground our life, all right, in the supreme act of worship, which is sacrifice, namely that sacrifice he made for us on Calvary, now represented to us in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And as such, it becomes the source and summit of the Catholic spirituality. It draws us together in a community so that we can engage in a public act of worship, a public act of sacrifice, and then form our lives, come to form our lives in imitation of that supreme sacrifice on Calvary, once for all committed, now represented to us in the holy sacrifice of the Mass.
Very good. Anthony, thank you so much for your call. Glad you're watching us today on YouTube. And that opens up a line for you now, 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. By the way, I know we have a lot of viewers and listeners outside of North America. If you would like to jump in as well, dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. That's 1-205-271-2985. Love to hear from folks all over the world here on EWTN's Call to Communion. We're going now to Larry in Kenosha, Wisconsin, checking us out today via WSFI. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how you doing? Hope
Great.
You guys had a happy Resurrection Sunday.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. My question is on purgatory. I heard on this radio station by a priest that everybody goes to purgatory, whether you're Protestant or Catholic. I read in our Kenosha paper by a rabbi stating that in the old Hebrew text there is no mention of purgatory, along as in the New Testament there is no mention of purgatory. Also, if everybody goes to purgatory, how did the thief on the cross bypass purgatory? Jesus said to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." He didn't say, after you spend time in purgatory, you will be with me in paradise.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Well, a couple things to answer here. First of all, it's not the Catholic position that every single human being goes to purgatory. It's the Catholic position that every single human being might potentially go to purgatory. All right, every single human being goes to one of, this is the teaching of the Catholic Church, goes to one of three places upon death: hell, which you can go to immediately without bypassing purgatory, purgatory, or heaven. All right, it is possible to die and go immediately to heaven in the teaching of the Catholic Church. All right, so have the saints died and gone immediately to heaven. Remember St. Stephen, when he was being stoned, he looked up to heaven, he saw a vision of Christ seated at the right hand of the Father, and he cried out and said, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Catholic Church believes that Christ did just that, receive the spirit of Stephen, who was admitted immediately to the Beatific Vision. And that's the dogmatic teaching of the Church. The saints, those that are united to God in faith and charity and purity of life, pass immediately to heaven and to the Beatific Vision upon death, without any need to go through purgatory. It's only those who have been united to Christ in faith and charity, but have insufficiently purged themselves of their attachment to sin, or have done insufficient penance or reparation for sin, only those go to purgatory. And those, of course, that are not united to Christ in faith and charity go immediately to hell. They don't pass through purgatory. They do not collect $200. Okay. Now, as opposed to your rabbi friend who says that there's no evidence for purgatory, well, first of all, there's plenty of evidence for purgatory. Your rabbi friend mentioned only two sources of revelation, all right, and insufficient sources at that. We have a lot more sources than that the rabbi did not mention. He referenced the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. Well, I'll agree with him. There's scant direct evidence in the Hebrew text of the Old Testament for purgatory. He didn't say a word about the Greek Old Testament. Stands to reason, because the rabbis don't recognize the Greek Old Testament as part of their canon of the Bible. I'm thinking here specifically about the book of 2 Maccabees. The rabbis don't recognize that as part of the Jewish scriptures. Guess what? We're not Jews. We do recognize this as part of Holy Scripture. And the book of 2 Maccabees has clear evidence of an intermediate state in which the souls of the faithful benefit from the prayers of the church on earth. If you look at 2 Maccabees chapter 12, that's one source of revelation. One source of revelation. Purgatory is alluded to in St. Paul's epistles to Timothy when he prays for the soul of his friend Onesiphorus. Okay. He doesn't use the word purgatory, but he does allude to the practice of praying for the souls of the dead, again, which is a reality from which we infer the existence of an intermediate state where they can benefit from such prayers. And then, so we've got Old Testament evidence, we've got New Testament evidence. We also have the evidence of sacred tradition, because from the very beginning, when the holy sacrifice of the Mass was offered, it was always offered on behalf of the souls of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's been part of the liturgy since the get-go. That's what we call oral tradition. All right, so we have the oral tradition of the church and the interpretation of that tradition by the church fathers. Specifically, I'm thinking of St. Cyprian of Carthage and Augustine of Hippo, who identify the rationale for those prayers as assistance or liberation from the pains of purgatory. And on top of that, we have the dogmatic teaching of the Catholic Church, the Extraordinary Magisterium, in multiple councils, most recently defining it in the dogma at the Council of Trent, teaching that purgatory is effect. Sacred Scripture, tradition, magisterium. You got your trifecta of evidences right there.
It's all there. Larry, thank you so much for your call. When we come back, we'll talk with Adriana in Oklahoma City and James in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Lots more coming up here on Call to Communion.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
The nun is actually a religious woman who goes into the cloister and stays in the cloister. It's like a female version of a monk is what a nun is. And
that's a good explanation.
So the nuns of in Birmingham are praying for you, Brian. That's a powerhouse of prayer.
Totally blessed. I know some are praying for you too.
That's right.
I better be
Morning Glory. Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, this is Janet Morena of Priests for Life with Pro-Life Update. Today, the Church throughout the world celebrates the Feast of the Annunciation. This solemnity marks the moment when God Himself became an unborn child. At that moment, He also began redeeming the unborn child and all of us who were once unborn children. Never can the unborn be considered too small to be significant or to possess rights, for God Himself was that small. In many countries, today's feast is observed as a special day of life, even by decree of the government. At priestsforlife.org, you will find special prayers you can use in your homes and churches as you observe this feast. Let us all renew our commitment to the lives of the unborn and to Jesus, whose image is in each one of them. This is Janet Morena on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I want you to have such confidence in the Lord that you'll find such hope at seeing the beauty of the Lord, the majesty of God. What did our Lord say, huh? If your sins are as scarlet, oh, what? What's going to happen? They shall be made white as snow.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live, 2 hours with two of the world's best apologists discussing the most important event ever, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, with Jimmy Akin and Tim Staples today on Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Welcome back. Couple of phone lines open for you at the moment. 833-288-EWTN. Tricia is checking us out right now on YouTube. She says, I feel so drawn to the Catholic faith, but as a Protestant, I still have a problem with Mary. Now, I've heard you say that she is not worshipped, but some of the prayers sound like it to me. I want very much not to have my feelings be a roadblock. What say you?
Okay, this is Trish? Trisha.
Trish.
Okay.
Trisha.
So Trisha, I'm a married guy, and I sometimes say things to my wife that affectionate talk and so forth that I would not want anybody to put in print. You're right, because it's intimate and sometimes kind of downright silly and almost infantile. Lovers get this way with one another. They get very affectionate. They use language that is not meant to be literally true. All right, but it's an expression of affection. And I could easily imagine myself saying something to my wife like, you're everything to me. I couldn't live a day without you. Without you, I'd be lost. Without you, I'd be sunk. Yeah. And actually, I say stuff like that to my wife all the time. All right. Do I mean those statements to be literally true in a way that would pass, magisterial muster if they were being composed as a dogmatic declaration on the nature of marital fidelity? No, of course not. They're the language of love poetry. All right. And they should be understood as such.
Of course.
Okay. And that's how we understand the language of Marian devotion. All right. So when a Catholic prays, for example, our life, our sweetness, and our hope to the Blessed Virgin Mary, do we mean literally that she's our life, our sweetness, and our hope? Absolutely not. No, God is the source of our life. All right. But this is the language of love poetry.
Sure.
And this distinction between devotional language and theological language has been recognized by Catholic theologians for a long time. Get a hold of the works of Cardinal John Henry Newman on the Blessed Virgin Mary. He draws this distinction quite clearly. The dogmatic teaching of the Catholic Church about the Blessed Virgin Mary is a lot more constrained, all right, by the proper distinctions, all right.
Okay.
And it essentially is this: what are Catholics bound to hold about the Blessed Virgin Mary? Well, we have to hold that she was perpetually a virgin, that she was immaculately conceived, which means essentially that God gave her the gift of grace from the moment of her conception, and superabundant gift of grace. I mean, he gave her more grace than anybody else, but it's still a sort of measurable amount of grace. Right? It's not infinite grace.
Okay.
It was grace that was sufficient for her awesome dignity of being the mother of God, so it preserved her from actual sin. She never consciously sinned in her life, although it didn't deprive her of her free will. In fact, it gave her more freedom to say, "Be it done to me according to thy word." And like all of the saints, we believe that Mary is a powerful intercessor in heaven. She prays on behalf of the church on earth, but because of her overwhelming merits and her superabundance of grace, her prayers happen to be a lot more efficacious than many of the. St. James tells us that the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. The prayers of the Blessed Mother avail a whole lot. Okay, but they're still not infinite, right? They're massive. They're superabundant. They are hyper effective, but they're still finite, and she's still a creature who can achieve her holy will only through the providence of God, just the same way we do, although to a superabundant extent. She can ask her Son for divine favors, all right, just like we can. Well, just like we can in a state of grace. Even actually, let me qualify that. Mary's always been in a state of grace, even when I'm not in a state of grace. God forbid, though, I can still cry out for mercy. I can still pray to God. But if I'm in grace, I can do so meritoriously, just as I can pray and ask Christ for favors, all right? And he may or may not give them to me, all right? The Blessed Virgin Mary has the advantage, now united to her Son through the Beatific Vision and absolutely perfected and glorified beyond all creatures, except herself, who's a creature, of course. She can ask things for Christ, and she's just going to always get what she asks for because she's only going to ask for things that are in accord with the will of God.
Of course.
All right. So God uses the prayers of the Blessed Virgin, just like he uses all of our prayers, as secondary causes to effect essentially his divine plan, his providential plan for the salvation of the human race.
Tricia, thank you so much for checking us out today on YouTube. Hope that is helpful for you on your own path. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288 EWTN is our phone number. Let's go to Adriana in Oklahoma City, checking us out today via Oklahoma Catholic Broadcasting. Adriana, what's on your mind today?
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
A couple questions. First, what proof do we have that Jesus spoke directly to Peter and entrusted him what we know as the Catholic Church now?
Okay, well, let me jump on that one right first, if I might. Okay, so the key text on this, of course, is the 16th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, verse 18, where Christ says to Peter, "You are Peter," and Peter means rock. So he's effectively saying, "You are rock, and on this rock I will build my church. And I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven." So Christ identifies St. Peter with three distinct metaphors in his important role in the constitution of the Catholic Church. Number one, he's the rock foundation of the Church's unity.
Yep.
Number two, he has the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Number three, he has the power of binding and loosing. There are other passages of Scripture where Christ singles out St. Peter. Of course, in the Gospel of Luke, he gives the command to Peter to strengthen the brethren. In the Gospel of John, he gives Peter the command to feed the sheep, feed the sheep, feed the sheep. And, of course, in the book of Galatians, we see St. Paul reaching out to Peter as the pillar, apart from whom St. Paul would exercise his ministry in vain or run his race in vain, is what he says. So he had to get the right hand of fellowship, go up and visit Peter after Christ called him to be an apostle. We see Peter at the head of all the apostolic lists in the New Testament, and always in close company with Christ when others were more on the periphery of the circle of the disciples. But, of course, the classic text, of course, is Matthew 16. You're Peter, on this rock, build my church.
Your second question, Adriana?
How does the church end up in Rome? What?
Yeah, thank you. So St. Peter, after he left Jerusalem, he went first to Antioch in Syria, and he ministered there for a while, and that's where Paul actually had a confrontation with him. We read about it in the book of Galatians. And he went from Antioch then eventually to Rome, where he died the death of martyrdom. And that's known to us through sacred tradition, all right? And we have a number of testimonies. One of them, of course, is from second century church father by the name of Irenaeus. In the third book of his book against heresies, he recounts the succession list of the episcopacy of Rome and traces it back to St. Peter. And of course, it's not just Irenaeus. This was the universal conviction of all the Catholic faithful in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. We read this testimony is shared by Christians in the East, Christians in the West. All over the ancient world, it was recognized that the Bishop of Rome occupied the See of Peter. Again, we know that primarily from sacred tradition.
Adriana, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We go now to Mike James. James is coming up next. James is in Allentown, Pennsylvania, checking us out on EWTN television today. James, what's on your mind today?
Hello. I was calling in reference to the discussion with the difference between Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I was raised Roman Catholic, Irish Catholic, and even went to a monastery for a while. But I transitioned over into Orthodoxy. Now, there's a lot of beauty that comes from Orthodoxy and also with Roman Catholicism, and they mingle.
Okay, James.
Much.
Yeah, James. What is your question, please?
The question is, why? Why does a pope have the position of the primary leader, where in Orthodoxy we have a conciliar type of group with all the bishops, and the decisions are made in communion and also with the blessing of the Holy Spirit. So if we consider the Pope as a first among equals, meaning that he is a primary, but all the other bishops are equal with him, and that's what seems to separate Orthodoxy and Catholicism.
Okay.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the question. So the answer is that Christ never told the apostles that the rule of faith for the church was collaborative episcopal ministry. That doctrine that you just articulated has no basis in the teaching of Jesus. Okay, when Christ established the church, he did not say, "Thou art the collegial order of bishops, and upon this collegial order of bishops I will build my church, and I give to the collegial order of bishops the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever the collegial order of bishops in council binds on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever the collegial order of bishops in council looses on earth will be loosed in heaven." Jesus never said that. Now, if Christ had said that, we'd have some basis in divine revelation for the Orthodox model of church governance. Instead, Jesus identified St. Peter as the rock foundation of the church's unity and said to Peter, "You are the rock on which I will build my church, and I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and what you bind on earth is bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth is loosed in heaven." So we're basing this on the teaching of divine revelation, not on Byzantine or Orthodox oral tradition or human tradition. Now, it's worth noting that there's one Orthodox theologian, well, actually several, but one Orthodox theologian by the name of Nicholas Afanasiev, who wrote this about the position of the See of Rome in Christian antiquity. He says, Rome's vocation in the pre-Nicene period, that's before the Council of Nicaea in 325, consisted in playing the part of arbiter and settling contentious issues by witnessing to the truth or falsity of whatever doctrine was put before them. Rome was truly the center where all converged if they wanted their doctrine to be accepted by the conscience of the Church. They could not count upon success except upon one condition, that the Church of Rome had received their doctrine, and refusal from Rome predetermined the attitude that other churches would adopt. There are numerous cases of this recourse to Rome. That's Nicholas Afanasiev, the Orthodox theologian, witnessing to the historic role of the See of Rome as the authority to settle contentious juridical and doctrinal disputes in the ancient church, again founded on the teaching of Christ himself. Now, it's worth pointing out that the Orthodox model of church governance has certain inherent weaknesses. All right, one of them is how do you determine whether or not a valid council of Orthodox bishops has been held? All right, how do you make that judgment? And the Orthodox, as far as I can see, don't really have a principled way of answering that question. All right, witness the division in Orthodoxy between the Byzantine Orthodox, the Chalcedonian Orthodox, and the non-Chalcedonian Orthodox. All right, or the Monophysite churches of Egypt and Syria and Ethiopia. All right, and also southern India. So, take for example the Council of Chalcedon. Is the Council of Chalcedon a valid Orthodox ecumenical council, and why? And why? Well, the Copts don't think so. They don't think it was a valid council, and they will appeal to antiquity and tradition to back that judgment up. But the Byzantines do think it was a valid council, all right? And if you say, well, and they appeal, of course, to what they take to be the universal consensus of the Orthodox world, except for the Monophysites, all right? And so, as near as I can tell, if you ask an Orthodox, what are the valid councils, they'll say, well, they're the ones that the Church has accepted. And you say, okay, well, how do I know what the Church is? Well, it's the group of people that's accepted the valid councils. It's effectively a circular reasoning.
Yeah, it is.
Right? And you got to kind of get out of the circle in order to be able to answer that question with some kind of consistency. The Catholic Church doesn't suffer from that difficulty because we have an objective external authority that can define for us whether or not a council is ecumenical, whether or not it's orthodox, and that, of course, is the See of Rome.
That's it. James, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate it. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Are you familiar with Catholic News Agency? If you're not familiar with it, do check it out. Go to CatholicNewsAgency.com. It's a wonderful resource for you. Catholic news, blogs, stories, opinions, and lots more, and it's absolutely free. CatholicNewsAgency.com. We love CNA around here. It's an online service from EWTN News. Here's a text that we just got from Sarah. This is very important, Dr. Anders. Please help me explain to my family member why, as a practicing Catholic, I cannot attend his child's same-sex marriage. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the question. So I find it helpful to talk about marriage like this, okay? Why is there such a thing as marriage? And I'm not talking about the Catholic Church. I'm just talking about in general in human history. Why is there such a thing as marriage? Well, I mean, you go get some secular history books on marriage. I mean, it don't have to be by Catholics. Just go read some history, read some human anthropology. You'll find out that the reason that marriage is just about a universal human institution is for the blindingly obvious reason that when men and women get together in a particular kind of intimate union, then babies tend to happen. And that when babies happen, it creates new social realities and new responsibilities as a result. And marriage is the convention, the institution, in some form or another, and it changes a little bit from culture to culture.
Sure.
But basically, it's a nearly universal human recognition that the introduction of a baby into the universe creates obligations and opportunities that are very special. All right, babies have certain needs. All right, they have needs for education and food and shelter and formation, moral formation, and inculcation into the culture in which they live, and the resumption of civic responsibility and so forth. It's a pretty arduous job bringing children to maturity, and and the people that are responsible for bringing them into the world are not only the ones that are the best equipped to meet those responsibilities, but also the ones that have the primary moral responsibility to meet the needs of that child. And marriage as an institution is a recognition, is society's way of recognizing, hey, you made the kid, you take care of the kid, okay? And so when you look through the history of human marriage up until about the 19th century, it doesn't matter if you're looking at ancient China or ancient Nigeria or Inuit society and the Arctic Circle, you'll find that things like inheritance rights and property rights and kinship bonds, and these are the kinds of criteria, these are the kind of considerations that come into bear on the existence and the governance and maintenance of the institution of marriage. Very, very little attention in historical awareness is brought to questions of romantic love or passion or sexual pleasure or sexual inclination or proclivity. Those things just really aren't relevant to the question of marriage one way or another. So it doesn't matter if you're gay, if you're straight, if you're where you fall on the alphabet soup of sexual inclinations. That's got nothing to do with why marriage exists, okay? And so even in cultures that historically were more tolerant or accepting of homosexual behavior, take ancient Greece, for example. If you had said to an ancient Greek, have you got a boyfriend? Well, yeah. All right. Are you going to marry him? What? They wouldn't understand the question.
Right.
Wouldn't understand the question. Gay sex was what you did to deal with that part of your personality, all right? But marriage, well, that's for bearing children. And you can only do that with a member of the opposite sex.
Exactly.
Okay? So this idea that marriage somehow exists to deepen or prolong or excite or elongate the experience of erotic or romantic love is a really, really modern idea. It's a very modern idea. It's basically a 19th century idea. And it's from abandoning the intrinsic connection of the institution of marriage to child rearing and family that all of the confusion in the modern world about marriage and marital law emerges. Okay? So it's got nothing to do with whether you're homophobic or not homophobic. It has to do with what is this institution we're talking about. All right? The idea that marriage is somehow about bringing people together that are sexually attracted to one another so they can prolong or intensify that romantic or erotic attraction is just a category mistake. All right?
Yeah.
And it's a category mistake that has really, really severe consequences for the well-being of children. All right. Let me explain why. If marriage is essentially a government-imposed mandate for the purpose of legitimating forms of sexual attraction, and that's the way gay marriage has been presented polemically in modern American culture. If you go read the Obergefell decision and this kind of thing, all right, in the courts, right? The reason that Justice Kennedy, when he wrote his decision in Obergefell, supported the idea of gay marriage was he's explicit about it. He's explicit. He says we need this institution and society so that we can shift cultural attitudes about gay sex. All right? That's his idea. He wants society to become more accepting of homosexual relations, and by dignifying gay sex with the traditional title of marriage, he thinks that will be the effect, that you can shift cultural attitudes about gay sex by dignifying it with the title of marriage. And that he's very open about it. He says, this is why we're doing it, all right? But in doing that, what he's essentially done is separate marriage from procreation and child rearing. It's no longer about the welfare of kids and families. Right. It's now about dignifying homosexual relations. Well, is it in the best interest of kids to do that? Okay? And I would argue that it's not, all right? That children do best when they're raised by their biological parents, by the mother and father that brought them into the world, irrespective of their sexual proclivities. Okay? Irrespective of that. I don't care if you're attracted to oak trees, all right? If you bring a kid into the world, you have a moral responsibility to take care of it. And if you want children, you ought to seek to raise that kid in the environment where he's mostly going to thrive. The Catholic Church is all for diversity in marriage, all right? We think you ought to have at least one father and one mother on the job, all right? So we have to have sexual diversity in marriage. Gay marriage is anti-diversity. If I got two men, I don't need a woman. If I got two women, I don't need a man. No, we think God created the human race diverse, and you got to have diversity in the institution. The most important kind of diversity is sexually dimorphic diversity of male and female, necessary for the well-being, ideally for the well-being of kids. We believe the institution of marriage ought to reflect that. So essentially, what you're being asked to participate in is an institution that undermines the well-being of kids, the well-being of marriage, the well-being of family, and the well-being of homosexual persons.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much for your text. We do appreciate that, and we hope that it's helpful. You're into your explanations there. Let's go now to Mike in Cincinnati, listening to us on Sacred Heart Radio. Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure. We just have a couple of minutes, Mike. What's up?
I think I got a pretty easy one compared to the last two.
Okay.
I noticed that a lot of family gatherings and things, a lot of the Catholic brothers and sisters that have fallen away from the church, they won't make the sign of the cross anymore. And I was wondering if there was something, if you knew when the sign of the cross actually was instituted, and, is there something that I can present to them so that we can all be in union with that, and at least have that in common prior to praying and after our prayers?
Sure, I appreciate it. The sign of the cross is probably of apostolic origin. We read about it in documents of the church from the 2nd century, and the ancient Christian writer Tertullian, a North African theologian from the 2nd century, talks about it and speaks of it as having come down to him from the apostles. Now, we don't have any, that I'm aware of, we don't have any direct evidence of, say, St. John or St. Andrew teaching it. We have indirect evidence that they did. But in any event, it's a very, very ancient tradition, okay? I think that the reason that many Protestants are uncomfortable with it, well, it's also because of tradition, their own tradition, their Protestant tradition. Certainly not because Scripture's against it or anything like that. If I had to stretch for an explanation as to why 16th century Protestants, Luther and Calvin and the like, were against it, it was because they were unduly influenced by the intellectualist pedagogical theories of the Renaissance, and they thought that spirituality had to contain explicit verbal cognitive content, all right, because of their humanistic biases, because of their philosophy. And of course, the sign of the cross contains no overt verbal content. It's just simply just significatory only.
Sure.
And they had a bias against such things, which they deemed superstitious. Well, it's not superstitious, but that's kind of how early Protestants defined it. And then, of course, they've just passed that prejudice, and it is a prejudice, down through their own tradition, their non-sacred tradition, to their own churches to this day. I had a Protestant sneer at me one time for making the sign of the cross.
Really?
And I just shot back and I said, "What, you don't think God speaks sign language?" And that shut him up.
Beautiful.
And I think that's how I wouldn't get real polemical. I wouldn't get real cantankerous about it, but I would just say, look, you wouldn't object to addressing God in words verbally, would you? All right. Why would you oppose the idea of invoking the Blessed Trinity in sign language?
Yeah, very good. Mike, thank you so much for your call. Dave in Huntington, Indiana, wanted to know: do people in purgatory know that they're in purgatory?
Oh yeah, they know. They don't think they're playing golf at Laguna Beach.
It's not much fun either. Velda in Edinburgh, Texas, we don't have enough time to properly answer your call. Would you please call us back tomorrow? We will put you in at the head of the line no matter when you call, but do call us back tomorrow. Hey, Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Tom.
Remember that we do the program each and every Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. We also snag one of those shows, whatever Michael Birchfield thinks is the best of the week, and he'll slug that in for us at 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoons. I'm Tom Price. Please join us again tomorrow. Did I say Price? Tom Price. Please join us tomorrow after